have, and let's see, start. One of the things I want to remind you, you all have some notes there. You'll see on the PowerPoint, the blanks could be filled in, and these are first comment I got from Ethan is that, man, this is about twice as long as what the normal notes are for my sermons. So I'm gonna have to talk really fast. No, this week about hitting the mark, I really, it's an intriguing subject, an intriguing picture, hitting the mark, and I was really pleased that you guys responded to Ray this morning when Ray asked, well, what hits the mark? And it's a weapon. And so I happened to bring one. And what's the moaning about? You don't think I'm a good shot? I think, I thought of the one the BBF had. It was a dart. You know when I think about a dart and a dartboard, I think of smoke-filled bars, and I don't know where I got that idea, but must have been the TV show or something, But I sure would have used an arrow. And there's a principle in archery: aim small, hit small. And the idea is to really zero in on your target. And to demonstrate, I had a volunteer. Oh, there it is. Yeah, I'm looking for a volunteer. And Pastor Kevin Sadler actually volunteered, and then he didn't show. He was joking, like he normally does, right? No, anyway. But the idea of aim small, hit small, and when I'm out hunting, I don't grab my bow at every noise. There's a lot of squirrels in the woods, and I think of that, but I know usually at the beginning of the season when I start to hunt, and I hear a okay. At the beginning of the season, I get a little, oh no, squirrel. Oh no, squirrel. Oh no, possum. Oh no, whatever it is, And but then after I've hunted a while, I get to, oh that's a squirrel. Oh that's a deer. That kind of a thing. And I don't. But even when I see a deer, I don't necessarily grab my bow right away. I want to make sure I'm legal and it's my target. But when it's time for the shot, everything else kind of is blocked out, and I'm concentrating on hitting the mark, and everything else. I mean, everything changes, and like I said on there's dozens of things that need to come together to make a decent bow shot. It just doesn't happen. It's not like other weapons, but when the time comes, I want that arrow to fly perfectly and hit the mark. And we're going to apply some of those ideas today in our outline. We're going to look at, there's a lot of noise out there regarding sanctification, a lot of confusion. Then we're going to look at identifying sanctification and try to do some clarifying with the words. And then we're going to look at the context in which we find those words, and then we're going to wrap it up with giving you a charge regarding salvation, or sanctification, excuse me. So when I think about confusion, how would you describe sanctification in a word or two, or a sentence? Okay, all right, I see. Okay, I hear quite a few things. Those sounds like some pretty good stuff that you're saying there, but some of you were kind of silent. Some of you were a little bit quiet on that, and maybe you're not used to the preacher asking for somebody to say something or whatever. but I thought Ray might have gotten you in the mood of that already. But your definition is probably tied to some kind of an experience that you've had, or something you've heard, or something like that. But if it doesn't align with the Word of God, it's not going to hit the mark. If it doesn't align with the Word of God, and here we are, we're Bereans. Let me ask you another question, simple, yes or no. Are you sanctified? Good. Good. I'm glad you said that. And what do you mean by that? Think about that. What do you mean by being sanctified? And maybe I should ask BBF board, what did you think you were going to get from me on sanctification? But there's a lot of confusion that's out there. And in fact, I ran across a book called The 5 Views of Sanctification. It's a compilation of 5 different authors, and they all give a different view of sanctification. And I happened to read a review by a pastor who summarized them, and I'll give you the 5 views: the Wesleyan view, the Reformed view, the Pentecostal view, the Keswick view. Anybody familiar with Keswick idea? Yeah, that's older. That goes back a ways, but I see that hand. God bless you. No. And then the 5th one is the Augustinian dispensational view. But you know what this author did, this pastor? He said, and then here's my view. In other words, there were 6 views in that little article that he wrote, 20 pages or something like that about sanctification. There's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of noise. One of my first memories of sanctification, I was a teenager, and I was getting serious about the idea that salvation's by grace through faith, and I had made a stand in things, and good old Andy stood up in the Sunday night testimony time. I say old, I mean he was at least 50, 20 years younger than me right now. Anyway, but Andy stood up and he was thanking the Lord that he was sanctified. And I don't know, in a conversation at home, I asked Dad, what in the world is Andy talking about? And Andy was talking about that he was so sanctified they hadn't sinned in a long time. He was never going to sin again, in fact, because he was so sanctified. And that's one idea. Of course, I'd have liked to have asked his wife. So all of you said you were sanctified. Anyway, we will get to that. But that idea that Andy had was the idea of entire sanctification or sinless perfection. And they tie the word sanctified with that idea. It kind of fits the Wesleyan view, if you will, in that idea. I've known others who talk about walking the aisle or praying through or this kind of a thing and it kind of fits the Keswick view, and it's more complex than that, and it ties in with even the Pentecostal view. I've known Pentecostals who equate sanctification with getting the Spirit or a second blessing or the baptism or something like that, and sometimes they tie sanctification with that, but most of them are about something that you do and some experience and that kind of a thing. Others just wrap it up, well, it must be being good enough. Some of you mentioned being holy, but a lot of times they miss the idea of holiness and what that means. So, but if you're in grace circles, you could poke holes in most of those definitions. And it didn't take me long in kind of reading through those things. Well, they're not rightly dividing. They're missing the point of what God is saying. And so I want to clarify a little bit. And so because we're Bereans, we want to look to the Word of God, and that's where we'll get our clarification. But I'm not in Romans 6 yet, but I'm giving you an overview here. Depending on who you talk to, You're going to hear a lot about sanctification, but you know what I found about myself? I don't talk about it much. I don't use the word. And I thought, how come I don't do that? And well, if you use King James or New King James Bible, guess how many times you find the word sanctification in that Bible? Yeah, it's on the notes, right? 5 times, and it's used 5 times. Now, you'll hear me a little later get a little broader in my perspective here, but interesting, that noun is only used 5 times. Now, you'll also find 5 times it's translated holiness, the Greek word. So I went back to the Greek, and I've given you the strong numbers for your edification, for your future study to go look at all of these. But what we're going to do today is we're going to look at, to kind of clarify the noise, we're going to look at the times that the Apostle Paul uses this word. And by the way, the verb from which this comes from is the word for sanctify. You might see that word sanctify. That's used, I think, 29 times in the New Testament. And then that comes from the word holy. Its root is the noun holy. That's 200 and sometimes. So we're going to be here, no. But the sense of being set apart for God, that idea is used. And so when we look at this idea of sanctification, because it's related to the word holy, it's related to God who is holy. And when you say God is holy, how are you going to define that? Well, God is set apart from everything. He is set apart from everything. There are no gods like our God, small g-o-d, etc. He is set apart from everything. We're going to see the tie-in for saints. And by the way, did you notice that the word holy is translated saint in your King James Bible 61 times. And I love bumping into the word saint, but the idea of a saint is someone who is holy, and maybe we could just attach the word sanctified to it, the idea that that's what God is looking for. And then the word holy place is a common, the holy place is set apart even from the temple. And so that idea of set apart kind of comes out. Lee Himoki's got a great little booklet on sanctification, and he defines sanctification like this: set apart or make holy, to separate from defilement, dedicate, hallow. By the way, the word hallowed be thy name in Matthew 6 in the Lord's Prayer, that's actually a command. Lord, may you be holy. I don't know. It's just something to chew on. And the idea there of sanctification. But going on Lee's definition, he says to be essentially pure, or to put into a state corresponding to the nature of God. Good thoughts. And so you're going to find the word holy scattered throughout the New Testament and the Old. But I was just looking at the Greek. And then you're going to find the word sanctify in those 20-some uses. You're going to find that scattered out throughout the New Testament. But the noun sanctification is used 8 times in Paul's letters. Of those 10 times, 8 times are in Paul's letters, and then once in Hebrews and once in 1 Peter. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to dig into the context where each of those are used a little bit. And to go through even 8 verses, that's going to be a difficult thing. We're going to have to move rather quickly. But let me give you a quote from Paul Tripp about sanctification and what we usually talk about sanctification in the believer's life. He said, "We live in the middle of the world's most important incomplete process, sanctification." That caught my attention. But is that how we should first view sanctification? Now, I'm zeroing in on the noun. That was my title I was assigned. Sanctification. In the context, point number 3 in your notes. We'll examine Paul's use of this noun. We're going to touch on the verbs a little bit too, but the first one is Romans chapter 6 and verse 19. Romans 6 and verse 19. And I put it on the board trying to emphasize, show you the idea of the translation that is used there. I believe most of these are New King James, but some of them might be King James. Verse 19. I speak in human terms because of the weakness of your flesh. For just as you presented your members as slaves of uncleanness and of lawlessness, leading to more lawlessness, so now present your members as slaves of righteousness for holiness. And Paul's using a play on words there to kind of compare, just like you used to live when you were an unbeliever, now as a believer, have this as your focus and your goal. And I love Romans chapter 6. It is the context. In the context is victory over sin, and it shows us our positional truth of our identification with Christ's death, burial, and resurrection for our practical everyday life. Romans 6, 1 through 11. In verse 14 and 15 of that same passage, it is based on grace. And another quote from Tripp regarding in his sanctification article, he says, none of us is yet what grace makes possible for us to be. What grace makes possible for us to be. In other words, this isn't about legalism. This isn't about doing something, and etc. This is grace has provided sanctification for us, is mostly what you're going to see with this noun. And so it contrasts the verbiage, and it's pretty cool to look at how it balances back and forth. You used to be this way, now you're this way. You were heading for lawlessness, now you're headed for righteousness, etc. But the end goal is sanctification or holiness. And but notice what it is not. A noun is not an action word. A noun is not a command. It describes something. We have a command here to present ourselves in this way so that the end would be holiness, so that the end result would be matching sanctification or holiness. But it's not commanding us to be holy. Just to keep a hold of that. All of these verses, the whole context could just be a whole sermon in themselves. But skip down to verse 22, the next use of this noun in the New Testament. But now, having been set free from sin and having become slaves of God, you have your fruit to holiness or sanctification and the end, everlasting life. And here again, that same kind of a contrast. The unsaved with unrighteous, sinful fruit, the saved with saved fruit, if you will, of sanctification and righteousness. So sanctification and holiness, that's the expectation of every believer. That's the expectation, that's the hope, that's the end result. But, and don't get hung up with that last phrase there about how it says the end everlasting life. He's not talking about sanctification, earning your everlasting life. We know that salvation's by grace through faith. He's just talking about, in the big picture here, those that are saved have everlasting life. And so we were not going to have time to look at all the details there, but these verses are about the believer's life of yieldedness that yields, that produces, that is matching the idea of holiness or sanctification. And so we hit the mark as we present ourselves in righteousness for sanctification. That's how we hit the mark in sanctification. We present ourselves. That's the call to action there. Now come with me to 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. And do come there and look at the context. I did put the the verses online here or in front of you, but do take a look at the context there. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and verse 3. For this is the will of God, your sanctification, that you should abstain from sexual immorality. Simply put, sanctification. Hey, where did we get this? You know, he's not saying get yourself sanctified even by abstaining. He's saying sanctification, which you do possess, is God's will. God gives you sanctification. It is God's will, and it results in, or it amounts to, sexual purity. If you are who you say you are, if you are a saint, there's going to be sexual purity. And specifically in this context, that emphasis on fornication, which must have been a cultural problem, which is still a cultural problem, isn't it? And let's just move right into verse 4, because it just hand in glove. That each of you should know how to possess his own vessel in sanctification and honor. So, again, these are nouns. In sanctification. The realm, the place where you are, it's in sanctification. You all claim to be sanctified. All right? So, you have sanctification. He's not emphasizing how you get it. It's how to reflect that, how to show it in your life. And so sanctification is the standard here. The vessel is your sex organ, your body, and your sexuality, if I can say. And I know some might say, well, that's not me. I'm whatever. Most agree that your mind is your most powerful sex organ. You know, the root of the word fornication is where we get our word porn. And what does porn appeal to? Oh yeah, there's eye appeal, but it appeals to the mind. Your mind takes off with what the eye sees. But it's wrapped up in the mind. And so I'm going to ask you, I've asked this many a time from this pulpit, when I hit this word or hit a context, how is your sex life? Because everybody has one. We can let our mind go wherever we allow. Our sex life needs to fit the standard of sanctification and holiness, and the only place for holy sex is within marriage.